In this video, I will explain about research paradigm. Okay, a little bit of a review of what we have discussed. Talking about the research paradigm, that is the way we see the world, that is the one affecting the questions that we ask, and then the data we collect, the methods that we use, and the results that we find. If you still remember, we talked about researchers' interest, which may be different from one to another. For example, some researchers like to research so many people, let's say for example in a survey, and then some other researchers like to focus their attention to specific participants, not so many in number, but then they go very detailed about these participants. These differences are affected by the paradigm that they have. The first, we have what we call positivism. It seeks objective reality, and then it tries to explain, predict, or control reality. And these aspects are very important for positivist people: measurability, objectivity, reduction of uncertainty. It uses standardized procedures that can be duplicated. Positivist people tend to do quantitative. Let's say, for example, distributing questionnaires, doing statistical analysis, conducting tests, for example. The key point to take away is that positivist people like to reduce uncertainty, as though things or phenomenon can be quantified. That's why they use numbers. If you read journal articles in which the research is done using quantitative, you will see that phenomenon or phenomena in ELT, for example, are quantified using numbers. A lot of numbers there. Those are the characteristics of quantitative, and those doing quantitative are usually inspired by positivism paradigm. They want to explain, predict, and control reality, as though phenomena can be quantified. That is positivism. And then we'll move to interpretivism. Different from positivism. In interpretivism, we interpret the world from the point of view of the participants. So something is true or something is right if somebody believes it to be right. So we interpret the world from the point of view of participants. For example, if I believe I am a good teacher, based on interpretivism paradigm, that is the truth. If you believe as yourself as smart students, then that is the truth based on interpretivism paradigm. If you believe you are diligent students, for example, that belief is the truth based on interpretivism paradigm. For example, somebody is beautiful. Somebody says, I am beautiful. Based on interpretivism paradigm, that is the truth. Because interpretivist paradigm interprets the world from the point of view of the participants. If the participant says A is the truth. If the participant says B, then B is the truth. And then interpretivism is interested in everyday lives in the social world. Research is a subjective process. If we compare it to positivism, which always tries to seek objectivity, interpretivism is a paradigm believing in the subjective process. So we have the active involvement of the researcher in the construction and in the research process. So for example, we are interviewing participants, then the interviewers, the researchers, will direct what questions to ask, and in so doing they are active in the process of gaining the data, and thus the research can be quite subjective. Let's say, for example, when you see an interview or a talk show in which the reporter or the interviewer asks so many questions, you see that those questions are directed by certain goals, the goals of the news agency, for example. There are several criteria in which we can differentiate between positivism and interpretivism. The first, let's say, we'll talk about research progress. Positivism, they will use hypothesis and deduction. They will try to see whether the hypothesis can be proven through their research. Whereas in the interpretivism paradigm, usually they will use qualitative studies. You can see that they will try to gather rich data, descriptions, in-depth descriptions, details of participants' opinions or views. Those are the characteristics of interpretivism. A lot of words, different from quantitative, which will be dominated with numbers. Units of analysis are reduced to the simplest terms. As I can say, quantitative is always trying to operationalize social phenomenon using numbers. Let's say A affects B, whether or not, let's say, for example, the use of Mentimeter affects students' grade, and then they will use certain numbers. They will use formula to try to explain to what extent the use of Mentimeter affects students' grade. Whereas if we take a look at the topic using interpretivism paradigm, we will need to have some data which are complex. Interpretivism include the complexity of whole situations. You may want to interview students on how, for example, the use of Mentimeter affects their achievement, why they like it or why they dislike it. So you will have rich data, details, descriptions of the phenomena. And then the third, in terms of generalization, generalization means whether or not the research can be applied, can be generalized to other contexts. So if the phenomenon happens here, it can also happen in somewhere else, which has or which have the same characteristics of participants. Positivism will try to seek generalization through statistical probability. So if you are doing quantitative, for example, using positivism paradigm, for example, you want to research about the level of motivation of university students, non-English department university students. And then you do the research at a certain university. Let's say you include 100 participants. You will aim to make your data generalize to wider population. For example, non-English department students from all over Indonesia or from Java, for example, if the university is located in Java. Different from that, interpretivism does not seek generalization. So interpretivist is more interested in a unique or particular data. It is okay if their research cannot be applied to other contexts, because they are more interested in seeing phenomena in detail. Let's say, for example, we want to observe the behaviors of students with special needs. We don't need to research 1,000 students with special needs. We are just interested in researching 1, 2, or 3 students of the same characteristics of special needs, and then we'll see in more depth, and then they will be unique. It's okay if, for example, what we find cannot be applied to other contexts, because this is not what we are trying to seek. It's not what we are trying to investigate when we are using interpretivism paradigm. And then last but not least is the sampling. For positivism, you need large number of participants. So if you are a positivist, you are likely doing quantitative study. And to do quantitative study, you cannot just distribute your questionnaire to 5 or 10 students or participants. You will need more than that. Let's say the very least is like 50 participants. The more, the better. Because this is the advantage or the strength of doing quantitative. You will include many participants, and then you will seek or you will try to get generalizable data. Whereas in the interpretivism, it's okay if you don't get so many participants. 5, 7 participants, 10 participants, it's okay. But the selection of the participants is based on certain rationales. The participants should be appropriate, should be selected based on the research questions that you have. So for example, you want to know the views of the users students' views on the use of Mentimeter. So of course, you want to interview or include, let's say, students. The students doesn't have to be so many, let's say 5 students, then you invite them to interview. That is interpretivism. The next, pragmatism. Reality exists as both natural, physical realities and as psychological and social realities. Pragmatist people see what works for their purpose. In general, they will think that something is good if it works. These people tend to do mixed methods because they believe that they can use interpretivism paradigm and positivism paradigm based on the needs of their research. So they believe what interpretivists believe, and they also believe what positivist people believe. So they will just do what is best for their research. They will use certain paradigm when they need that. When they are doing qualitative, they will use interpretivism paradigm. When they are doing quantitative, they will use positivist paradigm. It is okay to combine methods, we call it mixed method, but each method will have their own paradigm. So if later you are doing mixed method, for example, you are doing quantitative and then you are doing qualitative, the quantitative part will use pragmatism. The quantitative part will use positivist paradigm, while the qualitative part will use interpretivist paradigm. But in general, the mixed method is inspired by pragmatism paradigm. What you cannot or we cannot do is to apply certain paradigm when you are using certain method that is not in accordance with that paradigm. So for example, interpretivist believes that the data should be rich in depth and unique. But what you do is distributing questionnaires in which participants will need to answer just strongly agree, disagree, and so on. Using questionnaire, you will not be able to gather rich and in-depth data. So this is what you cannot do. Another example is you want to distribute questionnaire, but your participants are only 10 or 5 participants. If you are using questionnaires, that means you are using positivist paradigm. It means that you will need to gather or to involve many participants.